Welcome back, everyone, to Verum Memorare. So, over the last few deep dives, we've been, systematically peeling back the layers on some, well, forgotten spiritual wisdom in our tradition. We looked at the really revolutionary discipline of silence, and then we explored the power of repetition in prayer, how it stabilizes things.
Right, anchors the heart.
Exactly. And today, we're turning to like the final piece of this ascetic puzzle. We're moving from the mind and heart to the body, specifically to the body's most ancient, visceral language, fasting.
Yeah, it feels like the natural completion of that triad, doesn't it? If silence teaches the tongue to rest,
Right.
and repetition trains the heart to sort of dwell, then fasting trains the flesh to obey. So we're really embarking on, I think, a crucial mission today. We need to rediscover the really profound theological meaning of Catholic fasting.
And not just rediscover it, but hold it up against, against the modern stuff, right?
Precisely. Hold it up against the bright, very intense, and, let's be honest, often seductive lights of the modern scientific wellness industry.
And that contrast, that juxtaposition, that's really the absolute heart of this deep dive, isn't it?
It has to be.
We absolutely have to understand the difference, the vital existential gap between Kenosis, that spiritual self-emptying done out of love and obedience to God, and biohacking, the secular self-optimization thing where the body's just treated like a machine for efficiency or productivity.
Yeah, and if we lose sight of the theological why, well, we risk reducing something incredibly sacred, a sacrifice, really.
Down to just a diet, a temporary health kick.
Exactly, and that's the ultimate danger. So the core question we've got to try and resolve for you, the listener, is this. How does the tried and tested wisdom, the stuff perfected by the Desert Fathers centuries ago, how does that find such astonishing confirmation in modern neuroscience? And yet, and this is the crucial part, how do we absolutely safeguard the sanctity, the transcendent purpose of this practice when, let's face it, the world around us tries to strip it down?
Tries to reduce it to just chemistry or longevity stats or productivity metrics.
That's the battleground.
Okay. Wow. Let's try and unpack this monumental topic. And we have to start where all true understanding of our faith really begins, don't we? Section 1, the traditional Catholic meaning, fasting as sacred preparation.
Yeah, let's start with Christ.
Right. And the fundamental assumption here is that fasting isn't like optional piety. It's not just a nice extra.
No, it's the bedrock of Christian life. Fasting enters our tradition, not as some, aesthetic suggestion, but as a discipline sanctified by Christ himself.
Yeah.
We often focus on the physical trial, right? Yeah. 40 days in the desert.
Matthew 4, the big confrontation.
But the crucial takeaway is that Christ established fasting as the necessary first act of spiritual combat. That's huge. He met the devil.
Yeah.
Not with clever theological arguments, but with renunciation. Renunciation of bodily comfort. That was the opening move.
And what always gets me is how he talks about it later in the Sermon on the Mount. He doesn't introduce it as some new rule he's laying down.
No, he assumes it.
He just says, when you fast. Matthew 6.1:10, that little word, when. It carries so much weight, doesn't it?
It carries the weight of prophecy almost. It assumes fasting is a constant expected discipline for anyone serious about following him. It's right there alongside prayer and almsgiving.
The big three.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was completely normative for the Apostolic Church. They linked fasting seamlessly with prayer and charity. That was the integral triad, the engine, really, of early Christian life.
So they'd fast before big decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before significant communal events, before, say, appointing people or sending out missionaries. Because they just understood that clarity of spiritual vision required discipline of the body.
You discipline the instrument before you use it for God's work.
Perfectly put. You discipline the instrument.
Yeah.
And as the church grew, these insights really hardened into wisdom. You look at the early patristic and monastic writings.
Yeah.
They treat fasting with this almost emergency level seriousness. It's not just penance. It's viewed as urgent medical care for the soul and the body.
Okay, first medicine. That's a strong phrase.
They absolutely called it the first medicine for the wounds of the fall. Think about someone like St. Basil the Great. He elevates the practice way beyond simple denial.
What does he say?
He calls fasting the mother of chastity, friend of prudence, counselor of silence, powerful associations. And then he concludes with this massive claim. It restores us to paradise.
Okay, hold on. That's That's a big one. How does skipping a meal literally restore us to Eden? What's the thinking there?
We have to understand the anthropology of the fall, right? Eden was lost through a misplaced appetite, a desire for a secondary good, the fruit over the primary good, which was obedience to God.
Okay.
So the fall introduced disorder, shame, the body rebelling against the spirit. Fasting is the physical mechanism for actively reversing that primal disorder.
How?
By consciously choosing abstinence, you're effectively telling your body you will obey the spirit. You're restoring the proper hierarchy that existed, supposedly, in paradise.
Ah, I see.
So Bezel saw that chastity, the right ordering of desire and prudence, clarity of judgment and silence attentiveness, they're all the direct results, the fruits of an appetite brought back under the control of the will.
So it's definitely not just about the stomach then. It's about, like, total sensory control.
Precisely. St. John Chrysostom, who was always such a brilliant pastor, he really hammered this point home, especially in the East. He'd scold people who only focused on the literal stomach thing.
What was his line?
Fast from sin first, then from food. The external fast is basically meaningless unless it fuels an internal purification.
Right.
The true fast has to encompass all the senses. Your mouth fasts from foul speech, your ears from gossip or evil sounds, your eyes from unclean sights, your hands from unjust actions. It's a full-body, 360-degree renovation project aimed at achieving what they called interior watchfulness.
And that watchfulness, that became the core goal for the monks, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The Desert Fathers saw fasting not primarily as self-mortification, but as a kind of technology for spiritual clarity.
A technology. Interesting way to put it.
Well, they observed a practical truth. When the body is busy processing comfort, constantly taking things in, the soul gets sluggish. It gets heavy.
Makes sense.
So the great monastic rules, like St. Benedict's rule, they codified food, just like they codified speech and sleep, specifically to keep the soul vigilant, awake.
He traded a kind of liturgical metabolism.
Yeah, that's a great phrase for it. A liturgical metabolism, where the monk's whole life was constantly aligned to the divine rhythm through measured abstinence and measured rest. The purpose, always, was clarity for prayer.
Which moves us perfectly into how fasting got woven into the very fabric of liturgical time. It wasn't arbitrary, was it? It was all about preparation, binding the body to this bigger cosmic and church rhythm.
Yeah, for centuries, the church calendar was this incredibly intricate choreography of abstinence and then, exuberant joy. Lent is the obvious one.
The big one, 40 days.
The collective imitation of Christ's 40 days,
Yeah.
purifying the body for the Feast of Easter. Advent, too, originally had a much stronger penitential feel, preparing mind and body for the Incarnation.
But it's the less-known examples, isn't it? The forgotten gems that maybe tell the deeper story of just how integrated this was. We should probably talk about the Ember Days.
Oh, definitely. The Ember Days, the Quattro de Por, they're such a profound example of how the Church connected the human spirit to the very rhythm of creation itself.
4 times a year, right?
4 times a year. Fasts held to sanctify the transition of the seasons. You had spring for sowing, summer for harvest, autumn for the vintage, the grape harvest, and then winter for quiet contemplation.
That feels like more than just spiritual discipline. That sounds like deep anthropological wisdom.
Oh, it is. It's deep wisdom. Man is, fundamentally an agricultural being, tied to the soil, tied to the seasons. By fasting during these 4 hinge points in the year,
Yeah.
the Church bound the metabolism of the believer to the providence of God. You're acknowledging dependence on nature, you're offering thanks, you're petitioning for the coming quarter. It linked the human body not just to the crucifixion, but to the entire cosmic order.
Wow.
It ensured that no season just slipped by without a conscious, collective pause and offering back to God.
And that same logic of preparation applied to individual feasts through the vigils, right? Fasting before the celebration.
Yes, the vigils illustrate the theological structure of joy so beautifully. To fast before celebrating a major feast, say, Christmas Eve or the night before Pentecost, that wasn't punishment.
No.
It was a spiritual prerequisite. It ensured that joy followed purification. Glory follows self-emptying. Think about it. If you just dive straight into a feast, your senses are kind of dulled by constant satisfaction.
Right. You don't appreciate it as much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The feast, the joy, it requires the body to have been hungry first. The silence requires the mind to have been watchful. The greater the sacrifice and the preparation, the more profound the celebration afterwards.
That idea of required emptiness feels most powerfully expressed in the theology of the ancient Eucharistic fast. This is something we really need to dig into, I think, because its decline.
Well, It tells a painful story about how our spiritual landscape is kind of flattened out.
Oh, absolutely. This ancient rule, the one that mandated fasting literally from midnight until you receive communion, it was a theological masterpiece.
Midnight.
Midnight. The core idea was that you approach the ultimate, the divine food, the bread of life, only with an empty vessel.
Wow.
Both soul and body, the body's physical hunger, maybe even a bit painful.
That was intended to mirror the soul's desperate existential longing for Christ.
So it created this intense internal spiritual tension. The body's literally crying out its need.
Precisely. That physical waiting, that ache of hunger, it magnified the spiritual desire. It was an embodied prayer of petition. Kyrie eleison, basically written in your stomach.
So what happened? Why did it change?
Well, the reduction of the fast first, down to 3 hours by Pope Pius XII, partly to allow for evening masses, which is a big shift.
Okay.
And then, quite dramatically, down to just 1 hour after Vatican II, the intention was pastoral mercy, making it easier for people.
But there was a cost.
There was a cost. As you said, the cost was the flattening of anticipation, that powerful tension, the one that fused flesh and spirit together in this shared longing. It was largely diminished. Let's be frank, when the wait is only 1 hour, the physical body barely even registers the denial. So the profound sense of sacramentum, the external sign pointing to the deep spiritual reality, it got weakened because the external sign became almost imperceptible. The act of receiving communion risks being seen as just, the last ritual action in a sequence.
Rather than the agonizingly desired fulfillment of a profound fast, both physical and spiritual.
Exactly. The body was no longer really an active participant in that confession of hunger.
And just to round this section off, St. Irenaeus connects all this back to the cosmic scale, doesn't he? Back to Eden.
Yes. St. Irenaeus, writing way back in the 2nd century, he synthesized this whole picture beautifully. He argued, basically, that the fall came through eating the forbidden fruit, through that disorder of appetite in Eden.
Right.
Therefore, redemption unfolds through the deliberate abstaining from food. Fasting is the intentional physical reversal of that original act of rebellion. It restores the authority of the soul over the senses.
So the whole practice of the Church, culminating in the Eucharist where the broken consecrated bread is consumed in order, is actually healing that original wound of appetite.
That's the vision. So fasting was never, ever in its origin just some private discipline. It was the essential liturgical language of the body, a collective heartbeat that prepared the entire civilization for encounter with the divine.
It taught humanity its proper place, essentially.
Yes, a creature who depends on the Creator, whose first act of allegiance must be governing its own appetites.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've established the historical practice, the what and when. Now we need to dive into the really profound meaning behind it all.
The why.
Exactly. This is where we get into Section 2, theological primacy, and this absolutely irreplaceable concept of kenosis.
Kenosis. Yeah, this is the indispensable concept. It's the theological engine that drives all genuine Christian asceticism. It comes from that incredible Christological hymn in Philippians 2, verse 7.
Describing Christ's self-emptying.
His voluntary self-emptying, his divine descent into human poverty, taking the form of a servant. Fasting is, in a sense, the primary human enactment of that divine pattern. It's the voluntary stripping away of privilege, of bodily comfort, of self-sufficiency, deliberately creating a space, an emptiness, for grace to enter.
It's the ultimate act of humility made visible in the most tangible way possible, denying yourself even basic necessity.
Yes. The theological principle here is absolute. He must increase, but I must decrease. Divine strength is only perfected, only revealed through human weakness and vulnerability.
So when we fast, we're not trying to become physically stronger right then.
No, not at all. We're making ourselves spiritually receptive. We're creating a kind of ontological vacuum, a deliberate lack, so that God can fill it with his presence. This is why, just dieting isn't fasting. The object, the purpose of the lack is entirely different.
Okay, but the term kenosis itself, it has some theological baggage, right? Some interpretations are heretical, suggesting Christ emptied himself of divinity. Others see it more as him choosing not to use certain divine powers. How do we apply that deep concept to, skipping lunch?
That's a really crucial distinction. We're definitely not talking about emptying ourselves of our humanity or denying the body's goodness. That would be Manichaean, not Christian.
Right.
We're talking about emptying ourselves of our prideful claim to self-sufficiency and comfort. Christ didn't cease to be God on the cross, but he veiled and voluntarily restrained the use of his divine power.
Okay.
Likewise, the Christian fasting doesn't cease to be a functioning human being, but they temporarily restrain the use of their physical privilege the ability to eat whenever and whatever they want. It's an act of submission. It's voluntarily putting aside a natural right to assert a higher spiritual priority.
I see. So the goal is to sanctify desire, which brings us back to that Greek phrase you mentioned, paideiotas epithemias.
The education of desire. Yes, that phrase really captures the entire purpose of the fast. Sin fundamentally disorders our appetites, doesn't it? It makes us slaves to secondary goods. Food, distraction, comfort, loving them more than the primary good, which is communion with God. Fasting is the deliberate physical training regime that restores the right hierarchy.
How does that training actually happen in the body, though? Just by feeling hungry?
Well, by restraining the most fundamental urge, hunger. When we feel those pangs, that discomfort, and we choose not to immediately satisfy them,
Yeah.
we are actively allowing the rational will to reclaim governance over raw impulse. And again, this isn't hatred of the body, it's integration. The body learns obedience so that when we do feast later, we can rejoice properly without gluttony.
Oh.
The body learns to serve the spirit without constantly demanding satisfaction. You're essentially training the body to accept delayed and ultimately much higher gratification.
So the body learns to be a good servant again, instead of a demanding master all the time.
Precisely. If we're constantly feeding every whim and impulse, whether it's food or information overload or entertainment.
Yeah, the constant dopamine hits.
Right. We're just reinforcing the rebellion of the flesh against the spirit.
Yeah.
Fasting breaks that cycle. It creates the inner freedom that's absolutely necessary for any real spiritual movement. Without that education or desire, we're kind of permanently infantilized, ruled by our immediate physical needs and wants.
Which means the actual ache of hunger itself can be converted into something holy.
Yeah.
It actually becomes prayer.
It becomes the purest form of wordless prayer. The body's physical emptiness becomes this powerful, resonant echo of the spiritual poverty that's celebrated in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Every ache, every pang of hunger, when offered up, becomes a bodily supplication to God. St. Gregory the Great had that amazing phrase for it. Fasting is the trumpet of compunction.
Why a trumpet?
Because it literally awakens the soul. It forces it out of spiritual slumber and makes it listen. The deprivation creates a vacuum that only grace can truly fill.
This touches on the whole economy of sacrifice, though. Why does God seem to want us to feel this physical discomfort? What's the point?
Because the physical discomfort is the cost of reorienting the will. It's proof of sincerity. We're not offering something abstract. We're offering our actual discomfort, our weakness, our physical neediness.
Okay.
It demonstrates that the spiritual desire is so profound, we're willing to accept physical distress for its sake. And paradoxically, it intensifies the eventual fulfillment, just like silence makes sound more intense.
Right.
The fasting period intensifies the joy of the resurrection, the joy of the feast, or the joy of receiving the Eucharist. You need the crucifixion before the resurrection for the resurrection to have its full power.
And this loops us back powerfully to what you called the sacrament of emptiness.
It really is the unifying law of our spiritual lives, isn't it?
Yeah.
Emptiness precedes filling in every single aspect of sacramental theology. Think about it. If your vessel is already full of self-indulgence or spiritual pride or just constant comfort, where can God possibly pour his grace?
There's no room.
There's no room. So to fast before communion is the most tangible bodily confession you can possibly make. It's saying, Lord, I am empty, I am poor, and I want you more than I want bread, more than I want comfort. It's the body physically confirming the soul's absolute priority. It's reversing the choice made back in Eden.
Okay, let's transition now because this is where things get, well, pretty fascinating. We've got the ancient practice, the deep theology, but now modern science seems to be confirming the intuition of the cloister.
It really does.
The monks had centuries of lived experience, and now science is giving us the biochemical language for why their practices actually worked so well. This is section 3. Modern science echoing ancient insight.
It's a truly remarkable convergence, isn't it? Science, which often aims to demystify things, actually ends up illuminating the sheer genius of these ancient spiritual disciplines. It gives us a whole new vocabulary for the results of centuries of, well, sanctified experience.
And the prime example, the one that really broke through into popular awareness, is autophagy, right?
Autophagy, yeah, literally means self-devouring. This was the big discovery that won Yoshinori Isumi the Nobel Prize back in 2016.
Right.
The key insight is that when the body is deprived of external nutrients, basically, when we fast, it activates this incredibly sophisticated cellular self-cleansing mechanism. The cells literally start to cannibalize and recycle their own damaged components.
Like what kind of components?
Things like misfolded proteins, aging mitochondria, the cell's power plants, and various toxins that build up. The cell cleans house.
So the body literally performs kenosis on a molecular level. It empties itself of the bad stuff to be renewed.
It's essentially a Lenten process written right into our biology. The body burns away what's corrupted, what's old, what's slowing it down, in order to restore purity and efficiency. The Desert Fathers knew the result they experienced: renewed energy, mental clarity, better health. Modern biology simply explained the precise mechanism behind it, the biological switch that fasting flips to induce this profound cellular repair. It shows that the human body is actually biologically designed to participate in these cycles of renunciation and renewal.
Okay, what about the mental side? That extreme clarity, the lucid stillness the monastics often reported. They spent hours in prayer, often reporting being more alert, not less. Was that purely spiritual effort, or was biology lending a hand?
Biology was absolutely lending a hand, but crucially, it was sanctified biology. Fasting demonstrably enhances alertness. It doesn't typically induce that brain fog you get after a heavy meal crash.
Right.
Studies show a significant increase in key neurotransmitters when you fast. Dopamine and norepinephrine, which are linked to focus, willpower, motivation, the reward system, they both go up.
Okay, focus and motivation increase. And the really exciting part, the bit that speaks to actual renewal in the brain.
Aha, yes. That's the increase in BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of BDNF as like super high-grade fertilizer for your brain. It supports the survival of existing neurons, but critically, it encourages neurogenesis, the actual growth of new brain cells and new synapses.
Wow. So the fasting brain is an environment of repair and growth.
Intense repair and growth. That lucid stillness the monastics experienced, it was likely the product of a calm endocrine system combined with a finely tuned nervous network running on a cleaner, more efficient fuel source, ketones, once the glucose stores are used up.
So their spiritual discipline was, in a very real sense, being chemically supported by their physical discipline. It wasn't one or the other.
It was a completely integrated system. And we also now have modern confirmation of that ancient intuition that purifying the belly purifies the mind, the whole gut-brain axis thing.
The gut as the second brain.
Exactly. The connection there, mainly via the vagus nerve, is massive.
Right.
We now know the gut microbiome influences almost everything: mood, anxiety levels, immunity.
So fasting affects that.
Oh, hugely. Fasting helps reset this axis. It reduces systemic inflammation, that chronic, low-grade internal noise that seems to fuel anxiety and depressive states. By silencing the belly, as it were, the monastics were, completely unbeknownst to them, regulating their serotonin production and reducing the inflammatory cascade that contributes to psychological distress.
So the physical discipline literally reduced the chemical noise floor in their system.
Making contemplation, making focused prayer much easier.
That's just fascinating. It shows that the deliberate act of self-denial actually has immeasurable neurological output. The brain itself responds to sacrifice.
It absolutely does. You look at functional MRI studies examining deliberate self-control, whether it's fasting or maybe choosing a charitable act over a selfish one, they show activation in the prefrontal cortex.
The CEO part of the brain.
Right, the region responsible for moral reasoning, complex planning, empathy, and simultaneously, the amygdala, the brain's sort of fear and impulse center tends to quiet down.
So it's a physiological confirmation of the spirit reestablishing control over the lower drives, the higher brain taking charge.
Absolutely. Fasting helps shift the brain from a state of reactive survival, that constant scanning for comfort and resources, towards a state of more contemplative transcendence. You could almost say the brain, when it's rightly ordered through restraint, kind of kneels. It becomes less impulsive, more reflective.
Exactly.
Okay, this leads us right to the crucial theological caveat. We have to hammer this home now. If the benefits are this profound, scientifically speaking, isn't it a bit naive to ignore them? Couldn't the spiritual why sometimes just be a convenient cover for, well, self-improvement?
That is the defining question, isn't it? And here is where we have to draw that hard line in the sand.
Yeah.
The Christian does not fast because neuroscience approves.
Right.
We fast because Christ fasted and commanded us to follow. Full stop. The scientific validation is a beautiful, maybe unexpected gift. It illuminates the how.
But it doesn't dictate the why. Precisely. Theology and obedience reveal the why. If we invert that order, if the primary reason for fasting becomes balancing dopamine or living longer or getting a productivity boost,
Yeah.
then we've stripped the act of its salvific meaning.
Completely. It stops being kenosis, that self-offering to God,
Right.
and it becomes biohacking self-optimization for worldly ends. The physiological blessings, the autophagy, the BDNF boost. These are not the purpose.
Their side effect.
They're the overflowing grace. They're the collateral benefits, if you like, of an act that is rightly ordered toward God, toward charity, toward obedience. Science is a powerful witness, a fascinating witness, but it is never the judge of spiritual truth.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, because we absolutely have to draw that line with precision now. This brings us to section 4, the thin red line kenosis versus biohacking.
Modernity is brilliant at inversion, isn't it? It takes sacred acts, strips them of their transcendent meaning, keeps only the utility.
And rebrands them for the marketplace. Exactly. Fasting gets rebranded as detox, cleanses, or, the ultimate productivity hack. You still discipline the body, maybe even quite severely,
Yeah.
but the spirit,
Huh.
the actual connection to the transcendent, utterly ignored, gone.
Let's try and make that distinction crystal clear. Contrast the intentions directly.
Okay. Kenosis is self-offering to God. It's an act of love, an act of humility. It's saying, I choose spiritual nourishment over physical satisfaction right now so I can better serve you, be closer to you.
Okay. And biohacking?
Biohacking is self-optimization for the world. It says, I discipline my body so I can live longer, look better, perform better, be more productive, basically for my own worldly success and advantage. The difference lies entirely in the direction of the offering, upwards or inwards outwards for self.
Can we maybe use a concrete example in a scenario to illustrate the difference?
Sure. Let's imagine, say, a high-powered executive who does a 72-hour water fast. Why? To reset their system before a huge negotiation, aiming to get a cognitive edge, be sharper than their opponent.
Okay, clear goal.
That's biohacking. It's mastering the machine, the body, for competitive worldly gain.
Right.
Now, contrast that with, say, a mother who decides to skip lunch on a Friday to consciously commemorate the Passion. And she takes the money she would have spent on lunch and gives it to the local food bank. And maybe she offers up those hunger pangs as an intercession for a family member who's struggling.
Totally different motivation.
Completely different universe.
Yeah.
That's kenosis.
Mm-hmm.
Both involve physical deprivation, right? But one is rooted in utility and self-interest. The other is rooted in charity, remembrance, and transcendence.
The danger, though, is that the external act can look almost identical, but the internal spiritual posture is diametrically opposed.
And that posture is what determines the ultimate merit, the spiritual value of the act. If we fast primarily to gain control over our fate, over our health, over our success, it's actually a subtle form of spiritual pride. But if we fast to submit our control, our will, to God's will, then it's humility. Biohacking fundamentally seeks to eliminate weakness. Kenosis accepts weakness as the very vessel through which divine strength is manifested. Big difference.
This connects directly to a critique you raised earlier, this idea that modern holistic medicine claims to be holistic, but it often fails because it leaves out the soul. And the soul might be the sickest part of modern humanity.
I think that's profoundly true. The modern world is suffering from a deep ontological sickness, a spiritual fragmentation, a crisis of meaninglessness, pervasive anxiety, and it's rooted ultimately in a broken or forgotten relationship with the Creator.
And holism tries to fix this. How?
Well, modern holism often tries to treat this fragmentation by aiming for equilibrium through, say, chemical adjustments, optimizing diet, maybe practicing secular mindfulness techniques. It treats the body and the mind, but it stops short. It rarely, if ever, addresses the spiritual reality, the spiritual wound.
So it's often applying a psychological or chemical solution to what is fundamentally a metaphysical problem.
Exactly. True Catholic holism, on the other hand, recognizes man as this integrated unity, body, soul, and spirit. Wholeness salvis, which gives us the word salvation, means all three are in right order and in communion with God.
So the spiritual sickness of modern life.
The sense of displacement, the lack of transcendence, the gnawing anxiety that cannot be cured just by tweaking serotonin levels or doing yoga. A broken relationship with the Creator cannot be fixed by a 12-hour intermittent fasting window, however healthy that might be otherwise.
The body might be screaming what the spirit can't articulate, but if you only treat the scream,
Then the root cause, the existential dislocation, remains completely untouched. Fasting, understood as kenosis, attacks that root because it forces humility. It demands obedience to a transcendent reality. It's a lived declaration. My life is not sustained by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. That's the ultimate cure for the fragmented modern spirit.
And when this sacred dimension is stripped away, when fasting is desacralized, we're left with what you call the narcissistic fast.
Yeah, the narcissistic fast just turns inward. The person fasts not to approach God as a poor beggar needing grace.
But to perfect the mirror.
Exactly. To achieve a desired physique, maybe to outlive others, maybe just for the self-competitive bragging rights, I did a 5-day fast. It lacks that essential outward loving orientation that the prophets, especially Isaiah, demanded. The fast must be for the Lord and for the poor. If the fast only serves the self, it's just an exercise in vanity, not virtue.
Okay, let's pull the lens back a bit now and look at the broader cultural context. Section 5, cultural perspective and the loss of sacred rhythm. Because this practice, fasting, it's not unique to Christianity, is it? It feels like a universal spiritual reflex.
Oh, absolutely. It's a universal human truth. Pretty much every great religious and wisdom tradition use fasting as a doorway to transcendence, a way to participate more deeply in the cosmic order. Well, Judaism has Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Islam has the entire month of Ramadan. Various ancient pagan traditions, like the Eleusinian Mysteries, involved fasting before initiation rites. Christianity didn't invent fasting. You could say it fulfilled this universal wisdom, giving it its ultimate meaning and context in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ.
And the power of the medieval synthesis, that period when faith really shaped culture, demonstrates what happens when this practice is integrated right across society.
For over 1,000 years, much of Europe's rhythm, social, agricultural, liturgical, revolved around abstinence. Lent, Advent, Fridays, those ember days we talked about. These dictated not just what people ate, but when land was worked, when festivals happened. Fasting was like the cultural glue,
Wow.
uniting the body, the soul, and the whole society, creating a collective civilization that literally moved in rhythm with the cross and the resurrection. It was a shared, embodied language of penance leading to joy.
So what happens, anthropologically speaking, when a society systematically gets rid of these rites of deprivation? What's the loss?
It's a profound anthropological loss. Anthropologists have often noted that stable, traditional cultures use rites of deprivation, fasting, solitude, initiation trials to mark important transitions, to integrate individuals into the larger community, to teach limits.
And modernity.
Modernity, by largely abolishing these rites, leaves people in a state of perpetual consumption, a kind of permanent adolescence of appetite, without any real initiation into the seriousness, the limits, the sacrifices of adult life.
We lose the capacity for wonder, maybe, and for ritual seriousness.
Both. If you feast constantly, you literally lose the ability to truly taste the feast when it comes. The denial is what gives the eventual enjoyment, its meaning, its depth, its joy.
Yeah.
A civilization that never fasts loses the capacity for wonder.
And conversely,
A civilization that only feasts, that has no place for denial, loses the capacity for seriousness, for reflection, for understanding limits. We suffer today, I think, from a kind of perpetual distraction and spiritual softness, precisely because we've abolished the very mechanism, fasting and abstinence, that was designed to harden us, to clarify us, to wake us up.
so to actually choose to fast today in our culture, it's genuinely an act of cultural rebellion.
It really is. It's prophetic resistance against the relentless pressure of the consumer machine. The entire consumer economy depends on us having perpetual appetite, perpetual dissatisfaction.
Right, always needing the next thing.
When you fast, you are declaring in the most visceral, embodied way possible that your ultimate source of satisfaction is not material. You're saying, I am not defined by what I consume. Your body is remembering the sacred, even if the surrounding culture is doing its absolute best to forget it entirely.
Okay. We've covered the why, the how, the science, the culture. Now we need to bring it all home. Section 6, practical spiritual integration. How do we restore the body to the liturgy in our own lives? And we're not talking about rigid, legalistic self-punishment here, are we?
No, absolutely not. It's about a gentle, intentional re-education of desire, allowing the wisdom of the Church's rhythm to shape us again.
And the path to restoration starts by bringing together that ascetic triad we've been exploring across these deep dives.
Right. Fasting, silence, and repetition. They're meant to work together in perfect harmony.
Oh, so remind us.
Okay. Fasting quiets the flesh, making the body receptive. Silence quiets speech and all the external noise, making the soul receptive to grace. And repetition, whether it's the rosary, the Jesus prayer, chanting psalms that stabilizes the heart and attention, especially during the trial of hunger when the mind can wander.
So practically we could try pairing them.
Yes. Emulate the monks. Try pairing even a short fast, skipping a meal, maybe with a fixed period of silent, repetitive prayer. Offer the discomfort, the distraction, consciously as intercession for someone or something.
What about small, faithful gestures the average person listening can actually use to re-anchor their spiritual lives without feeling totally overwhelmed by, say, a midnight to communion fast?
Reclaim the Friday abstinence. That's a huge one. Even if you can't skip a full meal, choose simple food. Abstain from meat, definitely.
Mhm.
Or give up a specific habitual luxury for the day. Coffee, dessert, alcohol, social media. That intentional act of commemoration of the Passion every week is an incredibly powerful spiritual marker.
What else?
Look again at those ember days. Maybe you can't do the full traditional fast, but could you mark those 4 seasonal transition points with some form of simpler eating, extra prayer, maybe giving something away? It's a way to bind your modern life back into that ancient cosmic rhythm of the church.
Using fasting for discernment, too.
Yes, before big decisions or before periods of intense prayer or thanksgiving. Use that physical emptiness to create spiritual focus.
And we absolutely have to reclaim that sense of anticipation, especially around the Eucharist, given how much the fast has been diminished.
Even small, intentional extensions of the current 1-hour minimum can re-inject some of that sacred tension. Try fasting from the moment you wake up on Sunday morning. Right. Or, if you're able, maybe even for the night before after dinner.
Why? What does that do?
You are consciously choosing to approach the altar as a beggar, not as someone casually strolling in. You're converting your physical hunger, however slight, into a spiritual longing. You're making the prayer of Psalm 63 a physical reality in your own body. My flesh longs for you, like a dry, weary land without water. You're training your body to express your soul's deepest desire.
That immediately transforms receiving communion from just, simple consumption into a profound, anticipated encounter.
It has to. But, and this is crucial, that transformation is basically meaningless, even potentially dangerous, if it doesn't flow outwards into charity. We have to constantly stress the link between abstinence and almsgiving, just like the prophet Isaiah did in chapter 58.
Right. The fast God chooses is to loose the bonds of wickedness, to share your bread with the hungry.
This is the non-negotiable external manifestation of true kenosis. The fast must bend the will outward towards others. If we fast and just save the money for ourselves, or if we fast primarily to look good or feel virtuous, the act remains fundamentally self-centered.
So the food or the time or the money saved.
It must be redirected to the poor, to those in need. Only then does the fast become a genuine act of justice and love. Only then does it prove that our discipline is rooted in humility, not in vanity.
And finally, how does this liturgical rhythm, this pattern of fasting and feasting, play out in the family, in the domestic church?
Oh, the family table is the central altar of the home, isn't it?
Yeah.
It absolutely should reflect this liturgical tension. Simpler food, maybe meatless meals during Lent and on Fridays, intentional abstinence from certain treats, and then really magnificent, joyful feasting at Easter and Christmas and other great feast days.
Teaching by doing.
Exactly. Reintroducing this pattern, even in small ways, teaches children a profound embodied truth. Holiness isn't just abstract ideas. Time, hunger, celebration, it all belongs to God. It's evangelization through custom, through habit, teaching the next generation that true abundance is found not in constant having, but in disciplined, joyful participation in the divine life.
Wow, this has been an incredibly rich deep dive. We've gone from the monastic desert cell all the way to the biochemistry lab, but the conclusion feels razor sharp, doesn't it?
It leads back to that central finding, I think. Man is not a machine designed for constant consumption or endless optimization. We are a unity body, soul, and spirit. We are liturgical beings, designed for transcendence.
And modern wellness often seeks equilibrium, but without grace. It treats the chemistry maybe, but it ignores the metaphysical meaning, the why.
Whereas true healing, true wholeness salvus, comes from aligning ourselves that divine pattern of kenosis, of self-emptying love. Fasting, when it's practiced rightly, isn't about suppressing the body or hating it. It's about its eventual transfiguration.
How so?
The body learns obedience, yes, but the senses gain clarity. The soul remembers its fundamental hunger for God alone. When we fast correctly, our bodies truly learn to serve the Spirit in joy.
It's that core paradox of Christianity, isn't it? That true human flourishing comes precisely from the willingness to empty oneself, to decrease.
Because the goal isn't ultimately self-improvement. It's transfiguration into Christ. Fasting rightly is to confess with our entire being, mind, soul, and body that we are infinitely more than just complex chemistry. It's to kneel before the truth that health without holiness is only a refined form of decay.
Wow. Health without holiness is a refined form of decay.
Wholeness comes only from belonging body and soul completely to Christ. It comes from allowing our very selves to sing the same hymn as our soul. A hymn not of self-optimization, but of glorious transfiguration. So the invitation is there, go forth and fast. Not primarily for self, but for the Lord, and in doing so, find the true life that only comes from holy emptiness.